Chris, welcome. Welcome to the show, man.
Well, thank you for the invitation with another episode of Through a Therapist's Eyes, right? Co-host, and I'm the host, Chris Gazdick.
Indeed, sir.
We welcome you to see the world through the lens of a real mental health and substance abuse therapist with a goal to create emotional growth and being aware that this is not a delivery of therapy services in any way. Looking for feedback and discussion. As always, email me directly at contact@throughatherapist'seyes.com. And we can interact that way. We can also interact on the website and whatnot so that, Craig, we can accomplish part of our goal, right? The human emotional experience. Let's figure this thing out together. Sound interesting?
It does, man. It's always interesting.
Part 2 from Part 1. You ready for this?
Yes. Any housekeeping first?
Metrolina Psychotherapy at 704-461-8253 is still serving you for your child, adolescent, adult, and couples therapy needs. And MatthewHanksRealtyGroup.com. I didn't say that right. HanksRealtyGroup.com. And then Matthew at HanksRealtyGroup.com is our guy in local Belmont area who does all the realty needs for your selling or buying homes and stuff, right?
Great guy, man. Great firm.
They actually now have grown to be able to do commercial property as well. Good guys over there.
Just added the commercial about two months ago or so.
I think it might be longer than that, but about it's fairly new.
Yeah, I'm just proud that you didn't call it Realty Group.
I know, right?
Reality Group or whatever you called it last time.
So we got part 2 of what we call it, Neurology of the Brain and Effects in Our Life with Miss Gwen Wild. She was awesome for part 1, and I think we're looking forward to getting to some brain-blowing neurology work. You ready for all this, Craig?
I'm ready, man.
How about we launch? So, Gwen, I don't know if you heard my introduction, but on the introduction to the show, I think before the mics came on, I was telling you, man, I'm stressed out. I don't know if occupational therapists can do mental health therapy, but I need it, man. It's been a lot. It's been a lot going on for me today, man. That's for sure. Miss Gwen Wild is with us again, Craig, for part 2, as you see. And I thought I'd introduce you this night since we did on part 1. A masterful OT. That's what MOT stands for behind your name, right?
Sort of. Masters of Occupational Therapy, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was masterful. So I don't know how much we need to do with the introduction, but is there anything we missed from last time, Gwen? If someone happens to listen to part 2 without part 1, you need definitely to the listener.
Yeah, why don't you run through it again just for that purpose?
All right. Yep. Is an experienced occupational therapist specializing in children and adolescents diagnosed with autism and sensory processing disorders, the owner of Sensational Brain LLC, and the creator of, oh my gosh, Craig, I was amazed when I got to sit down with the Brainworks creator. That's Miss Gwen Wild. Working with sensory diet tools, she presents nationwide in topics related to sensory modulation and self-regulation. Hails from Galesburg, Michigan. Mm-hmm. You like the Wolverines at all?
I'm not really a sports person. No.
Oh.
No, I was going to tell you. So I never bonded.
I was going to tell you when West Virginia beat them about 10 years ago. You know, it's been a while.
Yep.
Anyway, with her 3 teenage children and husband. So welcome to the show again, Gwen. We're super glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be back again.
So I got a confession. I didn't get, because of my stress and technology anxiety before the mics were coming on. I was telling you, I got Craig another blue screen of death today.
Those are always fun.
No, they're not. I'm buying new laptops. I'm in the laptop market, I guess, now.
Yeah.
So because of that, I was going to do the Braverman test last night.
That's right.
Yeah.
We were going to share results.
And then I got a rush today, so I didn't get to finish it. And I'm going to turn my head, Craig. I mean, how'd you do?
I didn't get to it either.
Man.
Well, last week was a busy week for me too. My son's playing Legion baseball, so he's got a game every night, and I had stuff going on this weekend, and I didn't get it done.
The leaders of Through a Therapist's Eyes have failed you, Miss Wild. I am so sorry.
I know. I was going to do it then too, and I forgot. But I think if I remember, I was dopamine dominant, GABA deficient, something like that. So I'll have to go back to the results.
Well, I want to finish it. I was doing it today before I was rushed out of the office there with some things, and so I actually went through probably about 3/4 of it. So again, folks can find you. Where can they find you? At sensationalbrain.com or .org?
.com, sensationalbrain.com.
All right. And you got all kinds of CEUs on there. I don't mind giving you a plug because I was, again, riveted when I met you at your training. It was absolutely awesome.
Great. Yeah, we have all kinds. We mostly do 1 and 2 hour courses, but we do have a couple of the full day courses available on demand also.
So the BravermanTest.com is a neat way to maybe get into our follow-up from part 1 on neurotransmitters and stuff. I was going to start out with like a really broad question thought. And that, was basically like, what or how does the neurological system affect the behavior and function of kids and adults, right? Really generalized. And then I wanted to go into some things. But I was looking at the Braverman test, and it was cool. And I really want to encourage our audience to go to BravermanTest.com because the questions, Gwen, as I was looking down through it, were really kind of fascinating. And the reason why it was fascinating to me is because it was asking a bunch of like regular questions.
Right.
And it was questions about your personality characteristics and your muscle tone and your diet, your experience with sleep, your thought process, like all these things. And I'm curious to how you're going to start with this generalized question that I asked just now and the broadness of the Braverman test, because I'm developing in the last few years of my practice a belief that this neurology that we're going to talk a little bit about and the hormone structures of our bodies, like they seem to be a really big daily functioning driver. And I'm fascinated with how all of that works. So what is the Braverman test with these questions that I just described really asking about or getting at, and what did the results tell us? And then generally to start us out, how are kids versus adults affected by neurology? Boy, that's a lot, isn't it?
Sure. No, yeah. I think it just kind of underpins everything we do. We refer a lot in the OT world to a program called the ALERT program for self-regulation. And they have a good curriculum and they have developed something they call the pyramid of learning. And at the bottom of the pyramid is the central nervous system. And then the next 2 levels on the pyramid are the sensory systems. And then we move up and we start getting things like bilateral coordination and motor planning. And then when we get toward the top of the pyramid, that's where we get behavior and academic learning. And so the way that I like to help people think about the importance of the central nervous system is that's our foundation. And so we need, just if you were building a physical pyramid, you want the foundation to be solid and sturdy. And if there's a brick or 2 missing or unstable near the bottom of your pyramid, then it's harder for those higher level skills to develop, if they develop at all. And this can be structural, like when we know kids are born with fetal alcohol syndrome and it causes decreased brain volume, or certain diagnoses where we know there are actual structural differences in the brain, like Down syndrome, Fragile X, things like that. And then the central nervous system also obviously incorporates the neurochemistry, which neurochemistry includes both neurotransmitters as well as the neurohormones. And so that's our foundation. And we come into this world somewhat hardwired. You're either blessed or you're not, or you're less blessed. Based on genetics, with certain levels of neurochemicals. And then there are also things that happen in life that can further alter kind of your starting point at a neurochemical level.
So you're either blessed or not blessed, or in my case, jealous of those that are blessed.
Right.
So this is different than Maslow's hierarchy that I think people are a little bit more familiar with. So this is a great way to answer the huge generalized question that I answered. And I remember we spent a lot of time at the conference on this pyramid of learning. Can you say again, like what is the basement and what is maybe like the middle and what is the top, since we can't spend a lot of time on it?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, the basement or the lowest levels of the pyramid are definitely the central nervous system and the sensory systems, because most of those are already basically intact prior to birth. And then we continue to see rapid development in both the brain, and the sensory systems, which is definitely more of the fundamental brain levels in the first couple of years of life. And then by preschool, we start moving up to that mid-level, which is eye-hand coordination, things like that, motor planning, muscle tone. And then toward the top of the pyramid are what we would consider higher level brain skills, things that are happening in the frontal cortex, executive functioning skills, and all of that. So the foundation is definitely central nervous system and sensory processing. And so I always just talk about, we have to really focus on those first. And we do that both developmentally, like with kids, we would spend a lot of time going back and figuring out what's the lowest level of that pyramid that seems to be a little bit unstable, and working on those skills, furthering brain development, utilizing neuroplasticity, work on integration of the sensory systems. And then for an older kid or an adult, we may not want to spend lots of time waiting on those developmental skills to catch up or get in place, but we can still kind of shore up the neurology by changing the neurotransmitter levels in the brain on a moment by moment, day by day basis, and integrating sensory system input to free up the brain to make the most of what we have available.
Right. So there's a lot there. Craig, I'm just curious what you heard from that. What is your brain here from the pyramid there, and how that works with learning?
I feel like it's a little bit over my head, but did you say the middle part had to do with muscle tone and that kind of thing?
It can. I mean, it's definitely muscle tone in and of itself is definitely a nervous system, central nervous system level. But as we start getting motor planning that comes from muscle tone, like the ability to carry out a more complex action, sporting activities, things like that, that would be more mid-level for sure.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you, Craig, what you mean by over your head. I mean, the thing is, like, and we did when we spent a lot of time in the conference on this, and what I took from it was like a similar to Maslow's hierarchy. Basically, like, Craig, you got to have the basics before you get to the cognition. And I heard you say, Gwen, I think the top of the pyramid is kind of your frontal cortex, your abstract thinking, your reasoning ability, taking 10 facts together to whittle down to a thought and whatever. Well, that's what we think about when we're talking about thinking. But way before you get to the thinking process that we all operate on every day, you've got a bunch of stuff before that when what did you say, when a brick is missing, like that whole process gets gets to struggle.
It struggles. And so really this pyramid correlates with the different levels of the brain, the brain stem, the mid-level brain, and then the cerebellum, the cerebellar lobe. So we think about the higher level things happening in the higher centers of the brain, and then things like the central nervous system level being primarily integration of the sensory systems and regulation of neurochemicals. That's more brainstem level overall.
So, like, what that means is, like, when we got a kid that's struggling, like we said in part one, right? Like, they can't stand the cotton sweater itching the crap out of their skin. And you're going to sit there and try to tell them how to do algebra. And they're like, I cannot sit here. I can't sit here. I can't listen to you. I can't deal with this. I can't think about A, B, C, or D and answer this question because my skin itches. Right.
Or to go back to what Craig asked about muscle tone, like, if we have kids, and what we typically see is poor processing of proprioceptive and vestibular sensory input. So they kind of lack where their body is, and their brain isn't telling their muscles to fire. And if you have low tone, those kids just look kind of floppy, and they're having to work to recruit tone to stay upright and to stay engaged. And so their brain is busy, their brain is busy just sitting up. And so it's hard to free up those higher levels to think about math and language arts and behavior, keeping yourself focused when your brain is busy trying to make sense of where my body is and the sensory input.
Right. Yeah, that's why we expect less from elementary school kids.
Right.
We let them have breaks and they go and play. And we're going to talk about that curve here shortly for sure that you mentioned a lot about. Because, little kiddos, man, they can't do all that. But then when we expect middle schoolers to do more because developmentally their systems, their pyramid basement, if you will, is more developed.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But when anxiety or trauma or some of the things that we'll talk about in specific here in just a minute are struggling, well, those bricks are missing and they can't think.
Right. And it can even happen on a moment by moment basis, like you being frazzled from your day, you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's causing some neurochemical levels to decrease, others to rise. And so that's throwing off your pyramid, even though it's typically stable. You know, coming here, you're a little frazzled and overwhelmed, and it takes a while before you can really start focusing. And
Greg,
so
I'm going to tell you, my pyramid has been jacked up. Jacked up, man.
That happens to all of us sometimes. So even if typically solid, we just have to, and that's where mindfulness comes in, you know, to teach clients to take a minute and figure out what's going on in your brain and your body, and what can we do to restore that balance in those foundational bricks on our pyramid, if we go back to that analogy.
You know what's funny, Gwen? On a prior show during our little fun fact thing or whatever we're calling it nowadays, Craig, I talked about, you know, taking a moment and washing my hands and just imagining the day kind of go away and washing the stress off my hands and cleaning them up. I mean, don't you know, I washed my hands and did that just again today. I had like 2 recording stressful days in the last 4 shows, haven't I? When I come in here, Craig, and I take a shower, you know it's going to be rough. But your point, Gwen, and we'll talk more about it in a little bit, is there really are. I mean, I'm making a little bit light of that, but that's also very purposeful and very serious in trying to get myself centered, you know, to kind of do the show and to run from that.
Right. And those of us whose sensory systems and central nervous systems typically work well, we're better at getting back to a good starting point because we have more practice with it. But for kids who haven't experienced what it feels like to get it together very often, they just have weaker connections in the brain. And so we want to help them practice getting back to that state of calm and organization so that it becomes more automatic for them.
Craig, what do you hear with all that?
So, is it like being consciously aware that you're out of whack in one of those stages of the pyramid?
It is. And that's what we spend a lot of time teaching kids, is to become more in tune with what's happening. You know, what are you struggling with? What are you overstimulated by? At what times of day do you tend to be understimulated? Be mindful of your stress levels. Be mindful of the physiological indicators in your body that tell you, that help you identify your emotions. Like when my heart's beating fast and my muscle tone is rigid, I know I'm anxious or upset. And that seems intuitive, like it doesn't seem like we should have to teach that, but for many kids, they need to be taught. And that goes back to kids who's either, for whatever reason, they have sensory processing issues, and so that needs to be more of a learned process, or kids who don't get to experience co-regulation. That's kind of a big term these days that you've probably heard of, Chris, where, you know, when a little kid gets upset or angry or sad or they get hurt, ideally in a stable home, the parent picks them up and acknowledges their feelings. You know, you fell down and skinned your knee. I know that hurts. Or your brother hit you. That's sad. That's frustrating. I'm sure you feel angry right now. Let's take a minute to calm down. Mama will sit and rock with you, you know, or whatever. And so we are acknowledging their feelings and we're teaching them strategies to regulate. But there's a lot of kids who don't get that. You know, either they're told to toughen up, or they're just kind of ignored. You know, which there is sometimes when you want to ignore meltdowns and all that. But in general, there are times when kids need to be assisted in soothing, and kids who are not assisted, their nervous systems get hardwired for overreactions. You know.
And I'll take you a step further. I mean, honestly, a lot of what you're talking about absolutely applies to us adults as well.
Sure.
There's no doubt in my mind about that. You know, we learn, hopefully as a child, you know, how to identify things. I mean, it's funny, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of a time when I actually taught my son why he was so irritated and irritable, because he was sitting at the table after playing outside all day and he was starving. So I had to teach him that he was hungry Right. And he was like, oh, I'm hungry. I'm like, yeah. And that's why you don't want to eat spaghetti right now, which is your favorite meal. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, well, if you ate, I wonder what you'd feel like. And he ate. And a little while later, about 15, 20 minutes. So he's like, well, how do you feel now that you had some food in your tummy? And he's like, oh, I feel okay. I'm like, yeah, well, a little different, right? Yeah. Right. But you know what? I think with adults, we really do not practice mindfulness.
Right.
And being aware of how we're feeling or how we're doing at any given point. And honestly, these exact same things, not even similar, but these exact same things honestly apply to us.
Sure. And you wonder, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but 50 years ago, 100 years ago, maybe people were just naturally more mindful because they had more time to think. You go out to milk the cows and you think, and you go out to chop the wood and you have time to think. And now in our society, we just don't give ourselves much time to think. There's always something on in the background, and we're engaged in our apps, and we hardly even have to drive without being entertained, by podcasts and such. We don't really have to have time just to be alone with our thoughts. That is really what mindfulness is, so maybe we just have to be more intentional about it in our society.
And I think intentional is probably the right word. I'm a believer in figuring out what we need to be purposeful about, and then try to figure out how to really do that, because if we're not purposeful, it won't happen. I think you're definitely onto something there.
Yeah,
I think about things like that pretty often, insofar as how are people functioning on a day-to-day level, and what are the patterns and how are they created? You look like you had a thought, Craig?
Not really. I just think that we keep coming back to mindfulness in a lot of our shows, because I think that's really being aware of our thoughts and where they're going and how we feel is really key to a lot of the things that we talk about here. And it's just interesting that it's come up again on the show with you today.
Right. Yeah. And there is something magical. I think we touched on that last time too, about helping people understand the why, and that brings us back to mindfulness again too, to really help them get in touch with how do I feel before, during, and after, and really be in touch with how we feel. And I don't know why we're seeing that more people struggle with that, but I bet it's just the society, the way we're living, and busy parents who maybe aren't taking the time to teach some of that in early childhood, like you helping your son identify hunger, things like that, maybe people just used to have more time for all of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that's got a lot to do with it. I mean, you have devices and kids playing multiple sports and multiple activities, and you're running from place to place, and you get up out of bed and run all day long, drop into bed, pass out, sleep, and get up and do it again the next day. You don't give yourself time to do anything.
Of course, I feel like a word of caution too, and just thinking out loud as we are, which is why I love doing podcasts. We could do that, right?
Right.
Back in 1857, I think people were pretty busy too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can have toddlers and elementary school kids running around the house, particularly, my gosh, back then, how many kids did they have, by the way?
Right.
It wasn't 2, it was 10.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So it's a busy time, and I think that there are a lot of natural progressionary aspects throughout the course of a life cycle, where sometimes this is stronger and sometimes it is not. And when you're raising younger kids, that's probably, like we talked about the lost decade, Craig, that's a time frame that you have to look out for, because it is so stressful.
It is.
So interesting question, with that being just talked about out loud, just fresh, real thoughts. How does that factor into the pyramid? Does your pyramid, as you see that process you described, how much does it fluctuate day to day, month to month, and year to year, or life stage from life stage, do you think?
No, yeah, that's a big question. I guess I can just think about myself and people that I know. I think that it helps if your foundation becomes solid in early childhood, because that then becomes kind of your what's the word? Like your
baseline, maybe?
Yeah, your baseline. And so if you have a solid baseline in childhood, it's less likely, it's going to take more to knock it out of whack, to rock that foundation once that solid baseline has been set. But I still see it. I mean, for sure. Like when I had 3 little kids and I was trying to get them all out the door before 7 a.m., I was frazzled and overwhelmed, So you definitely see how life stages are going to impact that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have something, Craig? I thought it was.
No, I didn't.
He got me too, Gwen. I was like, he's ready.
Looks like it's been profound. down too. So, I think it probably all goes back to your baseline. Like if you have a stable baseline, it's probably rocked less and you just have more coping strategies. Like you've learned taking a shower helps you kind of get back to your baseline. And for me, it's jogging. I love going jogging, and that sort of helps me get back to my solid baseline.
Yeah, because that's like pure pain in my world, jogging.
I like it. So we've all found out what works for us as long as we start with that point of stability. And so we return to it quicker. So even if things rock our world, we're able to recover. And, for sure, having a support system and people who care and people who you can say things out loud to certainly is going to play a role in that also. I'm not sure where that fits on the pyramid, but we know it changes neurochemistry to interact with other humans. So
exactly, and that's my point. One of the things for me is we just joked about that. Yeah, I don't like jogging. There's probably something about the Braverman test I need to look at and see what that is, because
right.
I know being around water or being on a trail, I need to buy a kayak, because I think that's going to be really wonderful for me to be just sort of flowing on the water, and that motion and that stuff. That's what really does it for me.
Yeah.
Whereas with other people, no, they want to jump in an airplane and take a joyride if they're able to have an airplane, or,
right.
just take a walk or yoga, or you really have to kind of find what works for you. Is that a true statement?
That you have to find what works for you. And that largely depends on your sensory needs and issues.
Yeah.
And fall on that continuum.
Which honestly, I don't think how many people know about their sensory needs?
Unless you're an OT, likely don't.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's something we need to learn about, because, and I wonder out loud if that has a lot to do with our neurochemistry, which we don't totally understand, and our hormone structure, which I don't think we really fully understand. I mean, how much of that stuff do we not really understand to figure out what are our sensory needs?
Well, I know. And we're certainly just learning. We're really just in the infancy stages with all of those areas, like neurochemicals and then the sensory systems. And so we have people who are starting to understand the impact of the neurotransmitters, and we have people who are starting to understand the impact of sensory processing, but there's just a few of us that are starting to look at how they overlap, and I think I included a slide in the course where you attended where we showed how certain neurochemical differences, how those signs and symptoms overlap with signs and symptoms of over or under responsiveness.
And I've never seen anything like that at all.
Yeah. Well, I created it, so I hadn't seen anything like it either, but I just pulled information on signs and symptoms, and I thought, these are the same thing. So
yeah,
because it's the same underlying issue. I hope I'm right in that regard. I'm just kind of posing it as a theory, but the signs and symptoms are the same, no matter what. And researchers have shown us that that neurochemicals and sensory processing and emotions are all interrelated. So if you change any one of those, like if it's a day where you're just really frustrated, that throws off your neurochemicals, which you'll notice if you think about it, you're less tolerant for sensory input. Like if there's a day that you are really frustrated,
lose 2 computers and need to buy new stuff and try to figure out how it's going to work tomorrow, for instance,
and you walk in your house and your kids are screaming at each other and your wife says something annoying, you're more likely to overreact than on a day when you go home, you're overreact to the sensory input of all of that. Then on a day when you go home and you're in a decent mood and the kids are screaming at each other and you respond in the way you rather respond because it doesn't send you into sensory overload, like it does on a day that you're frustrated. So it's definitely all interconnected. It overlaps. It's probably because of that. Our sensory processing impacts our neurochemicals and our emotions, and so we respond accordingly.
Okay, super quick, because we got other things to get to, but it is. I quoted you, and I'll quote you again and again with the whole. Which one was it? The hormones and the neurotransmitters. I think the neurotransmitters was you. The hormone structure. I was kind of amazed, and I talked to when our sleep episode. Dr. Stafford was really talking with us in depth about his career on sleep, which is another good one, because all of these things do kind of overlap. Sure. It was like, man, I shared it in another conference I was at. We have like hundreds or thousands of different hormones upon literally, like we'll just say hundreds. I forget the numbers, and then hundreds of subsets of each one of those.
Right.
Right? I mean, you think about that. You just take testosterone as a hormone, right? And you have hundreds of subsets of that. So what is subset 73 hormone doing and interacting with melatonin subset 54, interacting with, progesterone subset 12, which men do have progesterone, right?
Right.
That's a dynamically involved system.
Super complicated. And then if your dopamine level drops for any reason, that can affect the testosterone level and so forth. So it just starts this cascade of events. So they're all wrapped up there together. It's different. It's certainly hard to tease out all of those things, but we just base it on signs and symptoms.
But we're getting at least aware of that as a scientific community, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Stafford, really, thank you again, Dr. Stafford. I'm sure and hope he's listening to another episode here. The help that he personally gave me was like, because I was like, dude, this is so frustrating, Greg. I want to know more. Remember, I was like that. Remember what he said?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. He was like, Chris, I know, we do. And that's why we have researchers and we're learning more. But he's like, we do know a lot now. And what I want to transition to is like what I mean, you're like so clear about things that we can do now and things that we can help people with now to understand the power of what we can do day in and day out to really influence our whole neurological, hormonal, psychological system.
Right. And that's where the hope comes in. Just realizing what we can do and how instant changes can be if we're just engaging in the right activities. And so that's where the hope comes from. That's how we want to empower people to know that you may have a set starting point, of your serotonin level, but you can still change it somewhat, and over time, as your body and your brain become more apt at making those changes, then maybe there will be long-term changes that will actually change your set point. We need more research to show that, but it kind of makes sense. Like if we can increase serotonin levels through practicing strategies like choosing joy and making gratitude lists, then it makes sense that as your brain becomes better at focusing on those happy thoughts, then your set point of your serotonin level may eventually change too. Makes sense.
Absolutely. Let's transition to some of that. Before I do, before the mics came on and you joined us, I was kind of like, man, I'm sure we're going to talk about diet and whatnot. But then after I commented it on the summary of part one, I realized I was like, wait a minute, because I'm thinking back to the conference. You're not talking about nutritional input and nutritional impacts and whatnot. You're talking about a different kind of diet. Is that correct? Or are you able to talk about?
Yes. I mean, overall, I talk more about what we call sensory diet, which represents all of the sensory input that goes into your body throughout the day. But we do know, and that's where we get into seeing changes in the way that we're raising kids right now, that our food diet impacts our neurotransmitter level pretty significantly. Neurotransmitters are produced through amino acids, which are a very basic part of the protein, and cofactors, which are things like magnesium, iron, zinc, vitamin B, different cofactors for different neurotransmitters. But if you think about kids who are growing up on McDonald's 3 times a day, they're probably not getting the right cofactors. And that happens a lot. We see a lot of kids growing up on fast food diets. We see a lot of kids growing up on processed foods. I'm guilty of that myself when I'm packing lunches. And so just being on the run and on the go, and because it's so easy now to have packaged foods and processed foods, I do think that all has the potential to greatly impact our neurotransmitters. And I think I told you I was taking the Daniel Amen course on brain health, and he feels very passionately about how our diet impacts our neurotransmitter levels too.
Yeah, and how much do we understand about all that? Because I don't want to freak parents out either. I mean, yes, you want your kids to eat your broccoli and lima beans and get your, 3 squares and all that kind of stuff. But, I remember you, like you said, you were kind of critical of people before you had kids.
Yep.
Why would we make them eat that stuff? But the realities are reality.
Realities are reality. And that's what I usually tell parents. Let's find a form of protein and let's find a multivitamin. And that's a good starting point. And, you just have to choose your battles. If you're looking at a child with a lot of issues, I usually do want parents to focus on the bigger things before we really take on picky eating. Most kids will outgrow it. The vast majority, I had two of my three were extremely picky eaters. And once they hit teenagehood, when they want to fit in, when everybody's eating pizza and they, things like that, then it just starts happening more naturally. So most kids outgrow it. So it's usually not something parents need to get too freaked out about. But we need protein and we need vitamins. So those are things that I do feel those are battles worth taking on. And then just encourage common sense, like presenting food. Experts say that it takes up to 10 presentations of food before typically developing toddlers will voluntarily start eating it. And so for some of our kids who are picky eaters, it may take 250 presentations of a new food. But rather than deciding my child hates green beans, keep putting green beans on their plate with no.
Yeah, let's highlight that because that's a nice little dietary fact. I don't know that I've ever really heard that. You said, I think, it takes 10 introductions of a new food to initiate the likelihood that person will voluntarily engage in that eating.
Right.
But with somebody with sensory problems and whatnot, that may double or triple, or what's the ceiling there?
Oh my, I know for my daughter, we had served things over a couple hundred times before she
literally.
Well, yeah, truthfully, before she voluntarily picked it up. And so during that time, you're just encouraging them to look at it, talk about it. What other things are the same color as the green bean, and build things out of it and kiss it. There's a whole approach called the SOS approach to feeding, the sequential oral sensory. And it's just that natural developmental progression with no demands that they actually eat it, but just engage their other sensory systems with it. And that's where, as parents, we tend to go wrong. Like if we know our kids hate peas, we stop serving peas, when in fact we should keep serving peas, but just not get into a fight about it. You don't have to eat the pea, but just keep the pea on your plate, And then eventually you usually see progress.
They may actually suck down a couple peas, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we did some stuff on Love and Logic to avoid those power struggles. I mean, that is a horrible moment when a kid is being forced to eat. We want to avoid that for sure, too.
Sure. Yeah. That just creates its own psychological damage.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That just creates its own set of psychological damage.
Probably. All right, let's go through a couple of things real quick. Unless Craig, let me check in with you. What are you thinking? Anything popping in your head?
No, I'm good.
Yep. So, trying to put my glasses on and I hit myself. There's a couple of areas that I wanted to go to maybe real quick. We've already kind of talked about them a little bit. One was that nutrition just now. Another one was on screens. And another one is on secondary nature, and then getting into your continuum that I thought was really super cool. So yeah, we did a whole show on Dr. Weigel's screen time and issues with the whole world we live in with social media and whatnot. How much do you know about that, and how impactful do you think that really is?
Well, I'm not an expert on it, but I think it's impactful. I've studied it more from the standpoint of what does it do neurochemically. And what we know is that two-dimensional screens, iPads, iPods, video games, TVs, they, while you're engaged in that, dopamine levels definitely increase. But mainly only dopamine, I mean, that's a huge oversimplification. But as compared to movement, like exercise, movement, those kinds of things create a little cocktail of neurochemicals that are released that buy you this window of opportunity where you function your finest. With visual input, it's mainly only dopamine. And so when the screen goes off, you're still left with nothing really that has any sustaining quality over time. So kids are really engaged with the screen, but the screen goes off and they're completely dysregulated, unable to focus, mad, having meltdowns, that kind of thing. Where if they would have spent the same 30 minutes outside, when they come back in, they're usually pretty organized. They can converse there, and it might be a good time to have them sit down and do homework after they come in. So we just see the difference in which neurotransmitters are impacted when we look at post-screen time versus post-outdoor playtime.
Interesting. Yeah, little kids got to get their wiggles out.
Right. They need to use that whole body.
Remember that show, Mr. Wiggles, Craig?
I don't remember that one.
Oh, man. Mike, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I think it was just called the Wiggles. It
The
was like,
Wiggles?
yeah.
Oh yeah, I know the Wiggles.
The Wiggles, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. What did I call it? The Wiggler?
We called it
Mr.
Mr. Wiggles.
Mr. Wiggles. Hey, my kids loved that when they were little guys.
Oh, yeah.
What about what did I mean by secondary nature on effects of neurology? Because I got that from some of your material. I think I don't know what I meant by that.
I don't either, unless you were just talking about how those neurotransmitter levels then impact the way that we process sensory input. That could be a secondary effect, possibly.
Okay, I'll skip over what that thought was. I don't know. So let's move to what I thought was really pretty interesting in a really fascinating way. When we spent time together, you talked about over responders, under responders, and sensory seekers. And as I recall, right, it had to do, I mean, boy, this is when we need YouTube, Craig. We need to get the cameras rolling on YouTube, because you have a graph, right?
Yeah.
And I know you know it well, but from what I recalled, like, this sets up a kind of a unique way to think about your little guys when you're teaching them as parents or teaching them as teachers, but also very much understanding yourself as an adult. So I want to highlight that as well, because a lot of our listeners are adults, and I think this stuff affects us just as much now as adults as it did when we were kids. And understanding this sort of unique graph that charts how our energy levels run, right?
Right. Yeah. You want me to explain the graph?
Definitely, please just take off.
Okay. Well, there's kind of two that function together. And so for the first one, we call it the continuum, the sensory processing continuum, or it's actually sensory modulation. And modulation is a part of sensory processing. And when you're well modulated, you're able to focus on what's most relevant at that moment, like the sound of our voices on this podcast. And you can put everything else on the back burner, like the sounds of other people in your house, whether you're a little hot, a little cold, feel of your clothing on your skin, things like that. So if you're well modulated, you focus most of your attention on what's most important at the moment. And so when we talk about modulation disorders, we see three primary types, and we all fall in here somewhere because it's a continuum. But at one end of the continuum, we have what we call over responders, who are having an over-responsive reaction to incoming sensory input. And that could be like the little girl who wears the same outfit every day because she can't stand tactile input, the way things feel on her skin.
From part one.
Yes. Or really picky eaters who can't stand textures in their mouth. So that's over-responsiveness. And then on the other end of the continuum, there's under-responsiveness. And we see everybody on that end of the continuum, they have under-responsive reactions to incoming sensory input. But there's really like a little fork in the road at that end of the continuum, because we see two different types. One we call passive under-responders. And those are in kids, they're the little bump on the log kids. You know, they're just kind of slouching and sluggish and sedentary and lethargic and not very motivated. They even tend to be the pudgy kids because they're not moving, you know. And there's a couple other things that go into that dynamic too. But they're what we call laid back, and we see a lot of laid back adults. You know, that it's nice to be laid back, but if you're too laid back, you tend to be kind of under motivated in life too, and there's a propensity to be under an underachiever, right? And then at the top of that fork in the road, they're also under responders, but we call them sensory cravers. And those people have an under-responsive reaction, but they seem to get that they need more than the rest of us do, more input. And so those are the people who are always on the go, you know. And adults, they're often exercise addicts, they're thrill seekers, like the people who want to bungee jump and skydive and all of that. People who like lots of input, you know, people, they don't like it quiet and calm. They want to constantly be on the go. And in kids, those are the kids who are running and jumping and spinning and crashing and driving their crazy. So those are our sensory cravers. And to correlate with that, we talk about thresholds. We all have a different threshold for how much sensory input we need in order for neurochemical change to take place. So this is when the neurochemistry and the sensory processing starts to come together. We see over responders as having a very low threshold. That means it takes hardly any input before they feel like they're overstimulated through noise, touch, visual input, some people that hate fluorescent lighting, things like that. And so they have a low threshold, and we want to keep them just below that threshold. When we hit the healthy threshold, we get a release of our like beneficial neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin. But if they're pushed beyond that healthy threshold, they go into the stress cycle, where, you know, fight or flight is activated and cortisol is released. That's a stress hormone. Starts its own negative chain reaction of events.
Stuff is flowing.
Yes. And then our under responders have a high threshold. Both our passive kids and our cravers. They need more than the rest of us do to reach that threshold. And so the cravers figure out how to get there. You know, those are the kids often, if they're coordinated, which if they're coordinated, that's a good thing for them, because they can be athletes and that helps them get to that threshold on a regular basis. If they're not coordinated and they lack self-control and the knowledge of how to get to that threshold effectively, then those kids are often seen as behavior problems because they just can't stop moving, you know? And if they don't have an appropriate outlet for that or a way to get to that threshold effectively, then it's hard for them to ever sit.
But effectively, we kind of know from what you're studying with neurochemistry that we need to meet that threshold, right?
We need to meet that threshold. Our
Right.
tendency with those kids is to tell them, hold still, sit down, stay seated. And really,
And they can't.
Yeah, they can't. They literally can't.
And we're not talking about ADD necessarily,
Not necessarily.
right?
In fact,
Just people
diagnosed as ADHD, but
people or kids that are learning or need to know, like, what is your threshold?
right.
So Craig, how are you receiving this information? Because what I want to be able to make sure we do is that it's applicable to people, like when you're wanting to sit in a boardroom for an important meeting coming up. What is it that you need when you're going on a long trip and you have to sit in a car? Like, how do you plan that? Like, us as adults, us as people, we need to help our kids learn, but we need to know ourselves, right? Like, what is our threshold? So do you get that? Like, what is your sensory threshold to maximize your ability to learn and to function and to do? Like, do you follow that? Like, what do you think Navy SEALs? Let's talk about Navy SEALs, for instance. Right?
Some of it's pretty high for those guys, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What happens? Go ahead, Gwen. What?
They would have a high threshold. They want lots of input, which is what attracts them to a career like that.
Right.
And if you put them in an environment where they just don't have that ability, what's going to happen?
They won't be successful 9 times out of 10. You know, give a Navy SEAL a desk job and they might get depressed or anxious or just not be good at it, you know?
Right?
Yeah.
And furthermore, if you put somebody who needs that quiet, dark room, I love my black light. Let me just get quiet sounds.
Yeah.
And you put me in an environment where, you know what, I'm supposed to go to basic training and have all these people yelling at me and going at me. What's going to happen then?
Yeah, overstimulated right away.
Yeah. Can't function well.
So what happens when those kids go to school and they're not ADHD, but they just need all this stimulation, and we sit them in chairs for 8 hours a day? I mean, they get put on meds, right? I mean,
put them on meds, or we're constantly punishing them. They're treating a behavior problem. So then they get this complex of, I'm bad, I'm not successful, I'm done. I have a case study. I don't remember if I showed it in your course, the course you run or not that day, Chris, but of a little guy that's typical IQ. He cannot sit. And so when he's being asked to sit in first grade and do work, he had this little meltdown on video. I am not smart. I'm dumb. I can't think straight. And that's the message they get, is because you can't sit still and focus like everybody else, you're not up to par, you're dumb. When in fact, he's plenty smart, but he needs to move. And so that it hurts their self-esteem. They feel like failures.
Well, what learning alternatives are out there for those kind of kids? And how do you know who's just needs the stimulation versus who's actually ADHD?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. It's not easy. You know, it's, even as I'm an experienced OT and it takes me time. Right now, because we lack specific diagnostic tools, it's a lot of trial and error. I can start a kid on a good sensory program of making sure their sensory needs are met. And we don't have time to go that in depth tonight, but somebody who's experienced in this, we would take the time to figure out, like, what are you over responsive to? Because we have 8 sensory systems. So I think you said, Craig, that you like yoga, things like that. So there are probably forms of input that you seek, like proprioceptive input, deep pressure input to your joints. But there may be other things that you're over responsive to, like auditory and visual input. And so we would figure out, what are you over responsive to? What are you under responsive to? Set up a pretty specific program to make sure that your needs are met before you sit down in an area where you need to focus, to make sure that you don't get overstimulated while you're trying to focus, things like that. And then I can see, is it helping you or is it not? And if it's helping you, then probably it's a sensory-based issue. Could have to do with neurochemistry too, but those are so intertwined, it would be hard to know for sure what the underlying issue is. We treat it the same. If that's not working, like I have a good sensory program and it's not really working, then that leads me to believe it probably is more of true ADHD. And the reason I say true ADHD is I do think a lot of times we misdiagnose kids with sensory issues as having ADHD because it looks like that. But true ADHD is typically something that may need meds or more specific intervention beyond a sensory program, because it has to do with the transporter genes for certain neurochemicals. So if a sensory program is not enough, then we may feel more confident thinking it is actual ADHD.
Do you have a handle on how many people get put on drugs versus actually ends up in an occupational therapist's office to figure these things out?
I don't have statistics on that, but I've read 2 good books. One by Charles Parker called The New ADHD Rules. I think that's what it's called. And then Charles Greenspan, I think it was the last book he wrote in about 2010 called ADHD something, overcoming or something. And they both think that it's just largely overdiagnosed, and that if we take the time to think about motor and sensory needs, to think about emotional well-being and safety, to teach self-regulation strategies, then only a fraction of the kids would actually require meds.
Wow.
And I think a lot of it's probably regional too. In my area, I know we have one doctor who just really is eager to pass out that ADHD diagnosis. And that's not really helpful, because if there's really something else going on, it's probably better to avoid meds if there's something else that could be addressed without meds.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that meds are, and I'm not banging on doctors, but I think that's the default of a lot of doctors. Here, try this and see what happens.
Exactly. And a lot of our sensory cravers, those people are going to be the movers and the shakers of the world. So do we really want to slow them down? Not really. What we want to do is set up an environment where they can thrive. And, I know in our area, a lot of parents are turning toward homeschool. And I think that's because they're really realizing that they can teach according to their kids' learning preferences in a way that many kids are more successful. And we did that for a couple of years for one of ours too, where you can really teach to their strengths. And it's sad that we're not able to accommodate that in public school. And hopefully we're making strides to go in that direction where we're recognizing learning differences and more. But a lot of times, if you allow those kids' needs to be met, then they thrive and they're super successful humans. Once we are adults and we can kind of pick our career based on our sensory needs, then very few people would probably need meds at that point. There are some for sure, but significantly less.
Yeah. I saw a thing on 2020 or one of those investigative reporter shows one time, and it was on this very topic, I think. And it's been years, but these kids were failing out of school. They were terrible students, and there was this program where these kids went away to school and they went to this ranch, or I'm not sure if it was a ranch or what it was, but they camped and they hiked and they rock climbed and they rode horses and stuff like that. And then at night around the campfire, they did lessons.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids were brilliant. They were making straight A's and just super sharp kids.
Right.
But put them in a desk 8 hours a day and it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And so what learning alternatives besides homeschools are out there for these kids who just need the stimulation?
Brainworks, right?
Right, Brainworks. We really are trying to get the message out there. And when I say we, that is like OTs and PTs, PE teachers. I would say that we're the group kind of leading the effort to make sure that the importance of movement is well known. And I led a research study that we just had published actually in the International Journal of Special Education. And we integrated brain breaks, which are just short opportunities to stand up and move, and then sensory breaks that are longer duration and a little bit higher intensity into general education classrooms. And we're able to see amazing change when you think all we're doing is increasing movement in the classroom. Things like decreased aggression, improved focus, decreased atypicality, like some of the odd behaviors kids will engage in if their needs aren't being met, adaptability, like being able to transition from one class to another, and all just through increasing movement. And so, that takes me back to, not just, again, because you're right, Chris, there's some things that haven't changed historically, but I think we'll all agree that we as a species are becoming more sedentary. And so I think that's why we see more kids who are needing this to be more intentional throughout their day, just, compared to when I grew up and we walked to school and we had lots of recess, and now kids don't, they don't, because we're worried about safety and so we don't let our kids play outside much, and we don't let them walk to school, and at school they're canceling recess all the time, and they're limiting recess because teachers feel a lot of pressure to get their kids to succeed academically. So they're taking away recess and PE. So we really just want movement to be integrated into the day. And hopefully that will help more of those kids to have their needs met within a general education setting.
So is that what Brainworks does?
Brainworks it can be used in that manner, and we did. We used a lot of our Brainworks activities to be the brain breaks in classrooms. The original intent of Brainworks was a little bit more complicated, and overall Brainworks is more specialized for kids with more intense needs, what may not be able to be met in a general education setting. But this study happened in general ed, and we were using some of the activities that can be found on the Brainworks activity cards, like deep pressure input, where you're just giving yourself input to your head, or through isometrics, and deep breathing, yoga poses, just simple strategies really that could be part of a more Brainworks customized program, or they could just be simple opportunities to move your body.
Interesting.
And that's the thing that I want to highlight. You asked Craig, I said we'll get back to it. And I don't know if you realize, but we've been talking about self-regulation skills.
Right.
Self-regulation skills when you're recognizing, when you're off, either under sensory blown out and ready to go to sleep, or seeking more input and whatnot. So talk a little bit, Gwen, if you could, about when an adult, let's just say, so that the adults can teach their kids when they start learning about themselves.
Right.
When an adult experiences the boredom of a day, what do they do? Or if they're experiencing a need to, do something, what do they do? Right? How can we self-regulate that?
Right. And, we all do it differently. In the mornings, I'm pretty focused in the mornings. I'm good in the morning, but I need my coffee, so as long as I have my coffee, and that's a sensory strategy, I'm good to go. In the afternoons, that's when I start realizing I am not effective anymore. I'm just kind of staring at email, and I'm not really doing anything proactive. And a lot of times I get to work from home, so that I have that flexibility, that's when I like to work out, because I've learned that about myself, that afternoons are my sluggish time. And so that's when I need that higher level, that higher intensity input. So that's when I work out. And then after I work out, I'm good again. I have another couple of hours where I can go back and finish off some hard tasks of the day. So we've all just found strategies that work for us. Or if you start getting frustrated or angry, we all have different ways of dealing with that. Maybe we know we just need to sit on it and go for a walk and then come back and have a conversation if it's somebody in your home, or, we've all learned some of those strategies. So in teaching kids, we just want to talk out loud about that. Like, you kind of did that with your son, that when I'm hungry, I get grumpy, and sometimes you get so hungry, you don't feel like eating, but recognizing that then it allows us to do something effective about it. So that's how we really start helping kids learn self-regulation. It's just through that self-talk of, I'm really hungry, but I know that we're going to lunch in 5 minutes, so I can keep it together, until then. And so it's just verbalizing it out loud.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I feel like adults just as much. I mean, I think when you are giving adults a little bit more credit than what we deserve, because I think that really we're not purposeful about thinking about that in a lot of ways and at a lot of times.
Yeah.
William Covey, I think, Craig, you read a lot of
Stephen Covey.
Thank you. 7 Habits of
highly successful people.
Right. One of those was like, stop after work and before you cross home the threshold and meditate for 5 minutes. I mean, that's what he's talking about, is without probably realizing it. Maybe he did. I don't know. Self-regulation skills.
Sure. Yeah.
And it all relates to hormones and neurochemistry, and you've got, Gwen, some of the biological basis for that, right?
Right. Yeah, we can actually see, studies have shown through brain imaging that stopping to think about positive things, to frame things in a positive manner, results in instant increase in serotonin, for example. So just being aware of your thoughts, acknowledging them, and then reframing them in a healthy manner, is a good starting point. I get that I'm frustrated because the computer's crashed at work, but now I'm at home and I'm going to do this and it's going to be more fun. And so you can kind of change that cycle.
Nice plug. Thank you for that help. Gwen, we got to wrap up. We're coming up on our hard stop. Craig, what are you thinking?
No, I was just going to say the same thing. I want to be respectful of Gwen's time. Gwen, any final thoughts? We've only got just about 3 minutes before you have another engagement or another commitment.
Well, that's okay. I think just to give a plug of the most effective ways to balance your neurochemicals are exercise, and it's huge. Sunshine and nature, those are huge. Being outdoors, like you were saying, Chris, about kayaking, those are powerful ways to help us balance our neurochemicals. And then the cognitive behavioral strategies of teaching yourself to choose joy and to think about positive things. Those are just easy ways that we can see immediate change in neurochemistry. So that's where the hope comes from.
They're easy things and free things, right? Unless you go buy a kayak or something.
It is, but people can understand the power of those. I mean, I think people can have hopefulness about the reality that you really can change your brain.
You really can. And the one thing that it takes is self-discipline. Because if you are feeling kind of down or blue, the last thing you want to do is exercise.
Right.
Just learn over time, make yourself exercise, and then you'll feel better, And so it just takes a little self-discipline. But once we get that and we start realizing, oh yeah, I actually do feel better, then we can start becoming, somewhat addicted to it in a healthy way.
Discipline equals freedom. Hey, Gwen, tell our listeners where to find you again. I know we did last time, but
sure. My website is sensationalbrain.com, and my email address is gwen@sensationalbrain.com.
But I really appreciate having met you, chatted with you. Maybe we can kind of chat again and do this again in some time. But your time is so valuable and so helpful just for my own self in learning, mental health and substance use and what I do. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing with our audience. It's been
You're
great.
very welcome. This was fun. And I really do like, joining conversations between OTs and mental health practitioners and seeing what we both can bring to the table and how in so many ways we're really overlapping in what we're working with on our clients.
Absolutely. Craig, I think we're going to summarize here in a little bit, right?
Yep, we will. Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
So, Craig, I got a question. How's your sensories feeling now, man? Your head blown? You need to go take a yoga mat out?
Well, in the intro, you said, "Am I ready to have my brain blown?" And it's definitely blown.
Pretty technical, cool stuff, though. Would you say?
Yeah, it was interesting conversation, though.
The neurology is something that is really fascinating. And so thank you again, Ms. Wild, for joining us to chat about it, because it's something that I think is dynamically involved in what I look at. See, session number one with somebody in a therapy office, I'm always saying, I want to think about how is life like now for you, and how do you want life to be like? And I spend a lot of time going towards that, and there's barriers to that. So sometimes we do have to look back at the history. We didn't get to talk about with Miss Wild, trauma effects, and we talked a little bit about social media effects, but there's also diagnostic biological effects with depression and, bipolar issues, and, the mental health world can have a lot involved in it. But bottom line, this neurology that we started talking about tonight greatly impacts our therapy goals on how is life like and how do you want life to be like.
Yeah.
So hopefully we looked a little bit at self-regulation and how can you manage that?
Yeah. I'm hoping Gwen may come back for another. We could probably have a part 5, 6, 7, 8, with
at
her.
At least 10 parts.
But yeah, I hope she does come back. And a lot of that stuff was fascinating. I thought the conversation around the stimulation and ADHD was fascinating stuff too. Because we're just throwing ADD medications at kids when perhaps they don't need it.
Yeah, and I know you have a big reticence with, medication, and I definitely want to talk. We really haven't talked about psychotropic medications much, and they definitely have their place. They really do. But I guess I'll tell you where we're going next. We'll be all out of order this time, but ADD, I thought we'd talk about that. It would be a perfect follow-up, what we're looking for diagnostically, how it works, some of the ins and outs there, because, we got to understand when we're dealing with psychotropic medications, we're interfacing with a dynamically involved nanomolecular function of our neurosystems. It's really like when you start talking about hormones and transmitters and neurochemistry, man.
Wow. I want to clarify. I'm not like anti-medication. I just think that's like the easy way out. A lot of times we could find a root cause or determine that it's not needed and go a different direction. But I think the easy thing to do is just to give somebody some meds and say, "Hey, have a nice day."
Yeah, thank you for that. I've never interpreted you as being anti-med, and I totally agree with you that it's quick. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Boom. That's what we do. You come in to your doctor and they're ready to prescribe.
Yeah,
and that is a concern.
It is.
But there are a lot of people, and I think at times you probably have been like, I don't want to do that. Listen, I don't want to take ibuprofen.
I don't either.
I don't want to take stuff if I don't need to. It's the trick is really understanding our neurochemistry, which hopefully we did a little bit, here tonight with Miss Wild, so that we can understand when we do and when we don't. Because when we do, we really need to.
Yeah.
But when we don't, we probably don't need to.
Right. I'm 100% agree with that.
But that is a confusing line.
I think another fascinating thing, too, about the conversation was you guys were talking about how much we know about things we can do. But how many hormones did you say Dr. Stafford said there were?
Yeah,
then subsets of that? We don't know squat in the grand scheme of things, we know a little bit, and we can do a little bit of stuff, but golly, man.
Yeah, it is, thousands of subsets or hundreds of hormones and hundreds of subsets of each. And
we talked last time about the thing. What was it? There's 200 neurotransmitters, 60 of them have been identified, and 10 of them named.
And that came from Miss Wild. It really is. Listen, I know, right? We know the impact of exercise. We know the impact of cognitive behavioral therapy. We know the impact of self-talk. I think the point is, and like I said, Dr. Stafford really helped me with that, man.
Yeah.
You have to listen back again and hear that, because I was serious. I was like, dude, I am frustrated. He's like, I know. And I went on to talk a little bit about it. He's like, well, but Chris, there are a lot of things we do know.
Oh, I'm not saying we don't know a lot. I think we do, but I think in the grand scheme of things, we probably don't know a whole lot.
Yeah, but he went on to really say, he's like, what we can do is learn more, have a thirst for that, and then help people with what the things are that we do know. And Craig, you know that exercise works. We do know those things. But I think that, and hopefully what maybe came out a little bit today along those lines, is that people can have confidence in that.
Yeah.
Hopefulness about really, I can manage myself.
You can do stuff. I'm not,
a lot of people really doubt that, Craig. I find people in my therapy office feeling terribly terrified because they feel the way they feel and they don't feel there's a lot they could do about it.
Yeah.
And that's a
That's
desperate
unfortunate.
state.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Because people feel that way a lot of times. So
it's kind of like space, isn't it? I mean, if you go outside at night with your naked eye, you can see a few stars and the moon. Then you get some binoculars, you can see a little more.
Yep.
Then you go to Walmart and buy a telescope a little bit more. Then you go to NASA and look at one of those telescopes, man.
Yep.
The space is infinite.
And then you get up into Hubble, and then you get up into the Kepler,
right? That's
the Kepler program.
That's kind of how the brain and body really is.
It really is. Listen, we have mapped the entire genome. We know what the whole elliptical thing is there, right? And all of we've mapped it. I think we're going to map all the hormones. I think we're going to map all the neurotransmitters.
I'm sure we will. Science just continues to learn and to know more.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating time to be alive too.
With technology growing the way that it is and our science growing the way that it is, I mean, what our kids, Craig, are going to see is going to be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, we'll be growing arms and
we will grow new
human beings and organs and
absolutely. You need a liver? Come to Yamaha, man. I saw it on Back to the Future. We saw some stuff. You ready to take us out of here, man? I already told you where we're going next, so you ready to take us out of here?
Yeah, ADHD is where we're going next. Find out more about the show on throughatherapisteyes.com. We have individual posts for each show. You can listen right there on the website. We have show notes where we include links and those kind of things if we talk about them on the show. You can also find links to our YouTube, our Facebook, and our Instagram out there on the website. And, man, I am brainstorming ways to turn this thing into a video podcast. I keep saying that.
We got YouTube now.
Yeah, we got YouTube, but it's only audio. If you're listening on YouTube, you're just going to see our logo and hear the audio.
So that gives me time to lose weight.
But Chris and I are looking for a way. I'm trying to crack the nut on actually recording the show and showing our faces. That should be fun.
Yeah, but I got to lose some weight.
Well, get after it, man. Get after it. And, sign up for the email list while you're on the website. And if you're enjoying the content of the show, then we would appreciate you telling your friends. Also, subscribing and giving us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform.
Hit the donation button.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
It's just the button. It's kind of hard to find on the website. We probably need to promote that up top somehow. But, going to the right of the screen, I think you go down midway. Pop a button. I think it's going to ask you to put in your name and address, probably a credit card kind of thing, and just helps. It's very secure. I gave us $1. I told you.
Yeah.
I need to give us another $1.
Yeah, anything you can give will be helpful. $1, $5, 10,000, whatever.
Hey, you told me not to be greedy, man. Told me not to be greedy.
We would be very appreciative of whatever you felt like you wanted to contribute to the show.
Compelled. All right, we're going to talk about ADD. We will see you guys next week. Have an awesome week.